A logline is an incredibly important tool for every writer to have in their toolbox. So in today's video, I'm going to explain to you what a logline is, why it's so important for you to know what your book's or story's logline is, and then show you exactly how you can write one for your own story so you can use this tool to hone in on what your story is really about. So first, what is a logline? The purpose of the logline is to tell people exactly what your story is about in as few words as possible. Loglines are very effective if you are trying to pitch your idea to someone who doesn't know what your story is about or have any prior knowledge in as short a time frame as possible. So they're very useful when you're trying to do things like elevator pitches. They can also be very difficult if you've written a story that has a ton of things going on in it, because you have to distill it and distill your whole story into just that one sentence. Loglines can be very helpful if you are trying to pitch your book to people. If you're querying a book, having a logline toward the top immediately tells agents what your book is about and can right off the bat hook people into reading the rest of your query. It's also useful in day-to-day conversation. If someone asks you, what is your book about, you can fire off 1 to 2 really short, snappy sentences that summarize the entire thing and that might make someone want to read it. It's more compelling to have a very quick logline than it is to have a long, rambling paragraph where you go on different tangents and like try to summarize everything that's going on. It's better when you're talking about what your book is about to, at least in my experience, have something prepared. Otherwise, I tend to kind of spin off in all these different directions. But aside from those real world practical scenarios, the act of writing a logline has always been very helpful to me because it's forced me to figure out exactly what my story is about. If I'm writing something really complicated that has multiple main characters, has multiple storylines branching off in every direction, the logline distills that giant story into the actual core of the story I'm telling. Figuring out loglines has gotten me out of really messy drafts. I had started writing books before and had gotten to the middle and I didn't really know what I was doing with the story and I couldn't prioritize what tangents were important to follow and to explore. But when I went back and I wrote the logline and I distilled the idea down to the core of the story I wanted to tell, it sharpened that manuscript and made sure that every scene that I kept in that manuscript would actually propel the story in the direction of the core story that I had figured out in my logline. You can diagnose a lot of story problems that way, because as soon as you know what your story is about at its core, you know what you should delete from it in order to make the story a sharper version of itself. So with that all being said, loglines can be incredibly difficult to write, and I'm gonna walk you through the basic formula for how to write a logline. Loglines are harder to write the messier your idea is. If your idea is pretty simple, this should be a breeze, but if you have a million things going on, buckle in because this can get kind of difficult. A couple rules right off the top for writing good loglines. This cannot be rambling. The shorter, the better. Ideally, you want 1 sentence. Maybe if your story is super complicated, you can go for 2, but you really want 1. You want no filler words. Every single word has to be contributing something to that sentence. You don't want to name any of your characters. You want to describe who they are. Instead of saying Adam, you want to say a retired archaeologist. Descriptive words to paint the picture of your different characters. If you've watched any of my videos before, you will know that every story has a character who wants something and something standing in their way. That conflict is what creates your story. And so the components of a logline are you start with the character who wants something, then you give what they want, and then you give what's standing in their way. That summarizes the conflict. The purpose of the logline is to quickly convey the conflict. Now, what's great about loglines is there are a couple of Mad Lib type structures where if you just put these things into this already pre-written sentence, you will get a logline for your book. So the first generally used structure is protagonist in brackets plus inciting incident in brackets plus character's goal in brackets plus conflict in brackets. So I just quickly wrote an example for this structure, and it would look like an amateur detective is transported back in time to solve the case of his parents' murder before the murderer can get to him. That combines all of the things we just talked about. So an amateur detective is the protagonist. Transported back in time is the inciting incident. To solve the case of his parents' murder is the protagonist's goal, and before the murderer can get to him is the central conflict. You start with the character who wants something, so that's the amateur detective. You then give what they want, which is to solve the case of his parents' murder, and then you get the thing standing in his way, which is the murderer who's trying to get to him. Because if the murderer gets to him first and kills him before he solves the case, then he can't get what he wants. So it becomes kind of Mad Libsy. It's fun. And the second Mad Libsy type sentence is when inciting incident in brackets happens, your protagonist in brackets decides to do something in brackets against the antagonist or whoever's standing in their way. So using that structure, we would get a sentence like, when he's transported back in time, which is the inciting incident, an amateur detective, who's our protagonist, decides to try to solve the case of his parents' murder, which is the action, before the murderer can get to him, which is the antagonistic force. Once you have this structure, you can play around with the wording of it. Both of these sentences are a little bit wordy right now. We would want to trim down the unnecessary words or potentially add in words that give a little bit more context to tone and color and things like that. Like instead of saying solve the case of his parents' murder, we just say solve his parents' murder. You might have noticed that in the second structure, when it said like our protagonist decides to do something against antagonist, it didn't really make any sense when I was actually writing the example sentence to say an amateur detective decides to try to solve his parents' murder against the murderer can get to him. That doesn't make any sense. So you have to change the words around until the sentence feels right. But this is the structure of the log line. So all of this makes sense in theory. Now I'm gonna write out the log lines or like just come up with log lines in these structures for like one or two of my books. So I can show you and walk you through exactly what the process is like when you're trying to hone in on a log line. Because it makes sense when you're dealing with a simple story, but when you write a book and then you try to come up with a log line after, sometimes things can get a little complicated. So I started doing this in another document, and then I realized that it would actually be kind of useful if I actually shared my screen while I did this. So we're gonna go through the protagonist, inciting incident, protagonist goal, and central conflict. So we're starting with the protagonist, who's a girl whose entire family was butchered. It's not incredibly specific, we'll come back to that. Gets, inciting incident, recruited to join a team of paranormal investigators who hunt the ghosts of serial killers. Inciting incident. Okay, that's kind of what it looks like if we're playing Mad Libs. So we have a girl whose entire family was butchered, gets recruited to join a team of paranormal investigators who hunt the ghosts of serial killers, and has to stop a killer known for making couples play deadly games like in Saw, designed to break their love before this serial killer can capture her. Jeez Louise, that's a long, wordy logline. We have to figure out how to cut that down. So first of all, she's 21. She's not a girl, so we're gonna say young woman, and then whose entire family was butchered around her. Yeah, that is incorrect. Oopsies. Is this actually important to the logline? Usually you like to add in like some sort of adjective, like, I don't know if we want to say like destitute, she's living in her car, she doesn't really have anything, a homeless. Is that really important to the conflict? No, but you want to put in descriptors if it's relevant. Like if you say, a paleontologist has to do something to do with dinosaurs, that's pretty important. But in this particular case, there's not much to her name that's really relevant for the plot of the story, so I think we're gonna get rid of that for now. Then gets recruited to join a team of paranormal investigators who hunt the ghosts of serial killers. That's pretty important, so we'll keep that as is. Has to stop a serial killer known for making couples play deadly games like in Saw, designed to break their love. We're gonna get rid of like in Saw. I have like my TikTok pitch just baked into my head because I post 5 videos a day about it and pitch it the same way. I think that's redundant. We can say games designed to break their love before he can capture her. I'd say that that's better. It's less wordy. This is the important bit, and this is the important bit. But the one thing that this pitch doesn't capture is the enemies to lovers arc. So here's another way that you can pitch the same book. Okay, this is another way you can pitch the same plot. A young woman gets kidnapped by a serial killer known for making couples in love play games designed to break their love, couples, and has to play to win to survive, we're gonna make this less wordy in a second, which will be challenging because her worst enemy is the one tied up across from her. This is not actually how I would pitch this particular book because this is a twist that happens a little bit later, but this just gives you a general sense for like how to structure a log line. So this makes sense to me. Has to play to win is not like super specific, so I'd probably get rid of it. Like, and is confused. Okay, like something like that would probably be a little more effective. But both of these things happen in the same book, so it's like hard for me to get all of that into one sentence. So that's why this exercise is so important, because it really boils down what the story is about. The story has these two things in it, but it forces me to kind of figure out the best way to pitch it, which, depending on my audience, like my second pitch is the more effective pitch on TikTok, although the first one does pretty well too. But if I had queried this, I would have gone with that first pitch and then tied in the whole enemies thing a little bit later, because it's just too hard to get everything into one thing. Or maybe I would have done 2 sentences. It's kind of a big book. This is the point. This is why it's a little bit tricky, but the Mad Libs thing gives you a really solid place to start. So that's all I have for you on loglines. I just wanted to give you a very brief overview of what a logline was and how it can help distill your book into a short pitch. I hope that it was helpful. If it was, I'd be super grateful if you could give this video a like and also subscribe to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes weekly videos sharing actionable writing tips that helps me make my own writing better. I'm the author of the 5-book paranormal thriller They Stay series, along with the book The Love Trials, which is coming out on April 28th. If you have any questions about loglines at all, please comment down below and let me know. I'd be super, super happy to go through it with you and answer all of your questions. I hope you have a fantastic week, everybody, and as always, happy writing.